watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. We are in one of our off weeks of our early Spielberg series, and we're going to be talking about our approaches to filmmaking today. I am back here again with Sam Camp, who joined us for the Close Encounters episode last week. It's good to have you back again on the podcast, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Eli. It's good to be back.
It's good to be back, even though we just literally finished recording the last one and jumping into this one.
I should have changed my shirt.
Yeah, that would have been. Yeah, that would have been. That's a good idea. I'm going to start keeping a wardrobe, in my office that I can change in between these shoots.
Yeah.
But I thought it would be fun to kind of just, me and Sam have done a couple of drafts before. So I thought it might be fun to kind of have a change of pace and just talk about just how we approach watching movies. I think a lot of times people don't maybe necessarily think about that. They just kind of watch movies.
Yeah.
But I think I personally have kind of, I guess, some general just ways that I watch movies and things that I do. And I know I've talked to you in the past of like, you kind of like looking at certain genres of film or certain eras and trying to like catch up on like this era of filmmaking and stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought, it'd be fun to talk that with you. But yeah, do you, when you are sitting down to like watch a movie, what is like your main motivation? Do you think about that, or do you just like, I feel like watching a movie? What's kind of going through your head?
I think I feel like it just kind of depends.
Sure.
I guess is the most unsatisfying answer I could give, but I think it really just it comes down to sort of what I'm interested in at the time. Am I wanting to read subtitles?
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to be challenged, or do I just want to be entertained?
Mm-hmm.
Most of my viewing these days is like in the evening, and so I'm usually pretty much toast.
Yeah.
And so it's not often that I'm just like, I really want to, watch a really hard movie that's,
Mm-hmm.
going to be like deep and just challenging and thought provoking. And, but yeah, I mean, I think it really just depends on what I'm feeling at the time.
It changes. I think it changes for me too.
Yeah, it definitely changes. And if you're viewing alone versus with people, and
right,
I think those play a role as well.
Yeah. I think too. I think reiterating what you were saying about like what kind of mood you're in too is, I find myself like sitting down, and I'm like, I have some time. I'm going to watch something, and just kind of like thinking about, man, I'm in a really reflective mood. Maybe, a movie that's more reflective will be good. Or like you're saying, like, man, I'm like dog tired. I just need something kind of like entertaining and wild to watch, to just kind of, I don't know, lift my spirits or give somewhere to escape to,
Yeah, or to unwind.
Or something familiar too. Sometimes it's like, I want to watch something familiar, something I've seen before that I know I love.
Well, I think the great thing about cinema is it can be so many different things. Like it can be
Right.
comforting, it can be challenging, it can be the whole gamut of emotions, and it can sort of serve all of those needs, just depending on what you watch.
Yeah.
Which I think is what's so cool about movies and TV as well. That it can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Along those same lines, do you have like I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this to not make it the same question, because what I have in mind is kind of like a side question of what we were just talking about. But like, the way I want to say it is, how do you decide what to watch? Which sounds like the same question, but I mean more like, do you have like a list that you go back to, or do you have like a process of like, oh, I want to knock out this area of film history? Do you have like a process or anything like that? Maybe like a recommendations list that you'll like go back to?
No, I really should.
Yeah,
But a lot of times it'll just be based on like if I've seen someone talking about a lot of times it's like a particular director
sure.
will get mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, oh, okay. Or if someone I admire is talking about a film, like I recently watched an interview with Werner Herzog.
Yeah.
And I really respect him, and I like a lot of his films, and like he's just sort of like he's such a purist and
Yeah.
just a awesome guy. And he had mentioned somebody that, because he had kind of got that question like who inspires you, and so he had mentioned a director, and I thought, okay, well maybe I should check out that person's film.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times it sort of comes via like other people,
Yeah.
Either friends of mine that will mention things, but a lot of times it's like other people in the movie industry really giving props to a certain director or films, and it's like, okay, well, I'll go see what that's about. And because I think there's a lot of movies like in pop culture today, but I think it's interesting to see like what's informing like the movies that are being made today, like are the contemporary directors, what are informing their choices and what's inspiring them, and go see that if I can.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I think before I answer, I was going to say what you made me think of is recently Greta Gerwig, when Barbie came out, she did this interview where she like named all these like inspirations for her when she was thinking about making this movie. And it's not, none of them are like, oh, it's like homage to this, or oh, it's like I'm, making my version of this. It's more just like inspirations list that she was like giving in the interview. And it's a bunch of like really great, like well-renowned films. And I was just like thinking, man, I hope like people that have like jumped all in on the Barbie craze, like hear this and like start checking out some of these other movies because Greta mentioned it in an interview that, is all over the internet. And so like, I think people do kind of watch movies in that way. And I do too. I think for me, one thing I do that helps, because I can have like, I forget the term for it. I saw a term for this recently that I was like, oh, I definitely have that. But it's just when you have so many things to choose from, you get you
Like
end up
dis-
doing like so much research that you kind of get frozen and can't make a decision. Like,
yeah, it's like paralysis by analysis.
yeah, I have that bad.
Yeah.
And so
or decision fatigue
yes.
is another.
Yeah. Yeah, mine is definitely more paralysis by analysis. But
Well, that's why I said I need to have like a list.
yes.
It's
And
like, okay,
that's what helps me. So like I listen to other film podcasts, like my one of the main ones I listen to every week is Film Spotting, and they'll do these like marathons, um, where like right now they're doing like a William Wyler marathon. Well, I had never seen a William Wyler movie, and he's like one of the most like well decorated, well respected directors in film history. I had just never gotten around to seeing him, and so listening along with this podcast and trying to like participate in the movies they're watching for their podcast, it kind of gives like some structure of like, oh, I'm listening to this podcast every week. Oh, I've got to watch the next William Wyler movie, this week sometime before the podcast comes out. So it kind of like gives some structure, and it's like I have movies that I'm gonna watch.
It's like a book club for movies.
Yeah. It's like the decision is made for me by the podcast. So that takes away that like anxiety of having to make a decision.
Yeah.
And also like helps me fill in like blind spots in what I've seen in that way. So that's one thing that helps. But other than that, like it's really just a lot of like before I say that, I was going to say, hopefully this podcast will help do that for people, like watching through, like if you listen to this podcast and you kind of watch through a director's filmography with me, I guess that's like kind of one motivation I have for making this podcast is to give some structure to people's like film viewing routine. And so,
and it's definitely, I would say, it's definitely helped me as well, because I've certainly taken away a lot of great recommendations and seen some great movies as a result. So
yeah. Well, I appreciate that, because that's kind of how I end up seeing a lot of movies from other people doing that. So
yeah.
But yeah, it is a lot of times I'll end up being like excited about, oh, this director's releasing a movie. Let me pop in a few of theirs that I haven't seen, sort of thing. Like last year, David Fincher released The Killer on Netflix. And I was like, oh, let me watch a couple of David Fincher movies I haven't seen. And I ended up just like on a whim, like turning on The Curious Case of Benjamin Button and like absolutely loved it. It's like a very, very extremely strange movie.
As is, I think, his entire filmography.
Yeah.
Have you seen Eraserhead?
Eraserhead, that's David. Did I say David Lynch? David Fincher is who I said.
Oh, David. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking of David Lynch.
Is Eraserhead is one of the most bizarre movies I've ever seen.
I couldn't finish it. I was like, I'm just not going to waste my time.
Yeah. It's a strange movie. Curious Case of Benjamin Button is a strange movie in a different way. But
yeah, I never saw it, but I know that at least the premise.
It's one of those that I'll watch and I'm like, this is incredible for me, but I know a lot of other people would hate this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just one of those things where I kind of there's some structure to the way I watch movies, but then there's also like, oh, this person's coming out with a movie. Let me catch up on some blind spots, or whatever, oh, this movie's coming out and it's based on, this story, and let me maybe watch a related movie or something like that. A lot of it is sort of that thing.
Yeah, or watch the original or something.
Right. Yeah.
because so many movies are remakes.
Yeah.
You don't even realize they're remakes.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Or, instead of watching whatever new Ghostbusters movie is coming out that they shouldn't be making, you can just go watch the original.
Yeah, there you go. But how do you really feel about it?
Yeah, I feel the same way about the live action Disney movies. Let me maybe just go watch the original instead.
Yeah.
Hi. Quick reminder that you, yes, you, can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show. Are there things you do like while watching a film, or maybe even like after watching a film, to like kind of process what you've watched? Obviously, like if you're turning on just like an action movie, there's maybe not a lot of processing you have to do.
Yeah.
So this applies more to like when you're, going along with the Close Encounters talk last week. If you're catching up on a Truffaut movie, which is a little bit more reflective, there's a little bit more to it than just an action flick to kick back to. Is there anything that you find yourself doing to try to process those movies? Whether it's just sitting and reflecting, or maybe talking with other people, or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably talking with other people about it would be one way. It'd probably be good, and I don't do this, but I should start, is just write down some thoughts afterwards. Even if it's just, what did I like or dislike? What did I appreciate about it? Or what are some takeaways? But yeah, if it's like a Tarkovsky or something, it's a bit more sort of like thought, that many more thoughts that have to be thought afterwards. But yeah, there's like I don't watch with like a notebook or anything in hand, which I don't know, maybe that's a good practice. But I kind of like to just take it in as much as I can, and then if I'll usually end up talking to a friend about it, or just kind of sitting and contemplating what it was.
Yeah,
that
for
I
sure.
just saw. Yeah.
I only ever have a notebook in hand for a movie, like if it's for the podcast.
Yeah.
I don't like to have to like take notes, and I find myself too like pausing a lot when I'm watching for the podcast, because like there's something I really want to get down, but the movie's like still it's still moving at a pace that's too much for me to like finish my thought. And so
I try not to
like watching that way. It's kind of necessary for me to be able to do what I do for the podcast. But most movies that I watch, if I'm writing something down, it's typically like afterwards, like reflecting. And I do try to write something on I usually just utilize Letterboxd. Has like your movie diary that you can log movies on.
Cool.
And so I usually write something about, which I'm behind on logging. I have like a long list of movies that I haven't logged on.
I have a long list of books that I've read that I haven't updated my book log on as well. So I understand.
Yeah. But if you don't, like, if you're not a app person, then, like my wife does, she has like a little journal for books where like she'll finish a book. She'll just kind of like write a few thoughts. like write the
Yeah.
date she finished reading it and write a few thoughts. She's not an app person. She likes notebooks and stuff. And
Yeah, I too am a
yeah,
pen and paper.
I'm an app person for everything except for the podcast. It's just easier to take notes like on movies and stuff with a notebook than on my phone.
Yeah.
But yeah, Letterboxd is really good for that, or just a journal, like a dedicated like little notebook maybe for writing down movie thoughts. I think that's great. One of the things I always ask my wife is like, but what do you do like if you can't remember when you read that book? How do you find what your thoughts were on it? And that's like that's my argument against the physical one, because in Letterboxd I can just go to the movie and then like immediately like go find my review that I logged and see what I had thought about it back then.
Well, she can just transcribe them onto a Word document.
Yeah, she would probably never do that though. But yeah, I think that's I think the writing is a really good process. It's a habit that I started. I've probably been doing that for I think I started doing that in 2019. So around 5 years I've been doing that, and it's been helpful because for one, like when you're writing something down, putting it to paper or putting it to your screen, like it helps you process. Sometimes like starting to write helps me process my thoughts on it, for one, and two, like you're just like kind of building your aptitude, I guess, of understanding film by writing and reflecting on it. That's one thing that's helped me a ton, is like having to think about how do I put what I saw and kind of like these ambiguous kind of thoughts about the movie in my head into a sentence structure that makes sense. Can help. It helps you like process, okay, what am I seeing on screen and how do I talk about it in a productive way? And so that's one thing that I do myself that I recommend. But also I have like some go-to critics that I like. I usually like their thoughts, even if I disagree. They're well thought out, and so I usually, if it's a movie worth like reflecting on, I'll go like to several critics. Roger Ebert is a big one that I really just think he writes so well about movies. And he passed away. I can't remember what year. I want to say it was like maybe the 2010s sometime he passed. But like almost any movie you watch that came out before that, like Roger Ebert has a review that you can just Google. And so I love to see what he has said about a movie. But yeah, so that's another thing that helps me process is sometimes someone else will say something that I was thinking but didn't know how to put it. And so you'll read it and you'll be like, yes, that's what I was trying to say in my head, but didn't have words for it.
Or they'll have just observations
that you didn't have.
Which I think is helpful as well.
But
getting like, even if it's just like reviews on YouTube or something, I think
if that's your thing, absolutely.
Just seeing what people have said about it.
Yeah, video essays can be helpful too, because a lot of times those guys, when they're made well, will kind of like put the images they're talking about on screen for you to see while they're talking about it, which can be pretty helpful too.
Yeah, those video essays are really good. a lot of those.
I don't have time to make video essays to that scale.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. Some of them. Yeah.
Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay. I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time here, but how do you determine if a film is good or not? Like, what are things that you look for? Or is it just kind of like when you finish a movie, are you satisfied or not? Like, what do you kind of think about when you're like, this is a good movie, I want to recommend it, or that was a bad movie, I wouldn't recommend it?
I feel like maybe the only thing that makes a movie bad is if it is like poorly done. Either like just poorly executed, whether that's in the edit or the directing or the acting. Typically, I think it's probably that comes down to the acting. If it's like, I just can't.
Sure.
I'm not believing these characters. And so I feel like that makes a movie bad. What makes a movie good
it's a loaded question.
Is subjective.
Right.
But yeah, it's hard to it's easier to say what makes a movie bad, I think, and which is why I said that first. But I think a movie can be good, but disagreeable, and unsatisfying.
Right.
But it could still be a good movie.
Yeah.
Or it could be satisfying. It could be entertaining and interesting, and beautiful. So it can be. There's just way more ways for it to be good. That aren't just like, I don't know, some objective thing.
Right.
I think there's fewer ways. I mean, I guess a movie can be bad in a lot of different ways as well, but I feel like a lot of times what we mean by a bad movie is it wasn't your cup of tea.
Right. Yeah.
But it was like, I don't know if it wasn't necessarily a bad movie, but it's just not something that you connected with in a meaningful way. Yeah, I don't know. That's it. I feel like it's a really unsatisfying way to talk about it. But
I wrote this question down knowing there wouldn't be a satisfying answer to it, so that's okay. I think you have like a few good points there. Like a bad movie usually is something to do with like a technical aspect that is just like really done horribly, or a performances that are just like totally, just some people can act and some people can't act. It's nothing against the people that can't act, but maybe someone should tell them they can't act. You got to have people that can tell you when you're bad at something in your life. It's a healthy thing to have, but I can, off the top of my head, I can think of like a movie that I saw that, like, I don't want to name the movie, but the sound was just like so terribly mixed that like it kind of took me out of the movie. It's a small, scale movie, like with a, minuscule budget, but I'm like, at the same time, I'm like, I've seen plenty of movies with no budget have good sound.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and
the hard work can be done to make the sound not make me like jump and cringe when someone like throws their keys on the table because it's mixed so terribly that it like hurts my ears,
well, and one sort of rule of like video production or filmmaking is like people will forgive bad visuals quicker than they will bad audio. So like even if you're like doing an interview with somebody, and as long as you have good audio, you can kind of muddle through. But if you have bad audio, it's unwatchable.
No, that's a good point. And that's probably like a big reason that it was hard for me to even like judge if the performances were good, just because the sound was so bad in the movie. But yeah, anyways, the bad movie thing is good. I think I want to say like I don't think there's maybe anything that you could say objective either way. Just because art is kind of like anti-objectivity in a sense. Like even that movie that like I thought was like terrible and I would say is objectively wasn't good. I'm sure there are people that like were like, oh, I loved this thing, or oh, this part made me cry. And it's like, well, I guess like something I thought is objectively bad, like someone connected with somewhere. So it's just hard.
That's the trouble with sentimentality, I guess.
Yeah.
Because people will be
but it could be like my friend made this and I have high respect for my friend and, that sort of thing. I don't know. But as far as what makes a movie good, I think it's just like I've found that a lot of it depends for you kind of have to talk about it personally instead of objectively. I find that sometimes it depends on like what state I'm in. Like because I've rewatched movies that I was more negative on and was like, man, why did I not go for this the first time? And usually it comes down to like I was tired or even like I wasn't ready to watch that movie because it's doing things like filmmaking wise that I wasn't I didn't have the ability to notice at that point in my like film watching. I don't know what word to use. I want to say career, but it's not a career. Like I don't get paid to watch movies. But yeah, some of it's that like, was I ready to watch that, or what mood was I in? Was I too tired? Sometimes that can make a great movie be something that's like not satisfying to watch. But I also really thought that you made a great point about like, is a movie satisfying isn't a good gauge of if it's good or not. Because I do know people that, some people, I guess it goes back to like, what are you looking for in a movie? Because some people, they want to be satisfied with an ending or with, the content of a movie. And if they're not, to them, it's a bad movie. But I'm the kind of person that believes like movies and art should stretch you and kind of push you beyond limits. So if a movie is unsatisfying, or like turns you off in some way, like something I believe in is, okay, let's examine why that is. Was there purpose behind it, or not?
Yeah.
Sometimes you come down and you're like, no, I don't think there was purpose behind it. I think this director just thought it was fun to like kill people in fun ways, and I don't think that's cool.
Yeah.
Or, oh no, like maybe this was a gory movie, but they were like saying there was purpose behind it. They were saying something.
Yeah.
And so, I wasn't really satisfied with how it made me feel, but I think the director wanted to leave me feeling that way.
Yeah. That was the point.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really good point. But even that is, like I said, kind of a subjective way to like gauge, like, because some people are just like, if I feel gross at the end of the movie, then I hate it. Like, it was a bad movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think, people can be more open to like what a movie is trying to do.
Yeah.
Rather than like, what do I want to get out of this movie?
Yeah.
Like, I want to be entertained and I don't want to be challenged. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But that's a pretty narrow scope of what a movie can do. Or what a movie is. And so I think it would be good to sort of break free of some of that if you can. But it's, like you say, sometimes you need to prepare yourself to see a movie, because it just takes more work.
Yeah.
Than other movies, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily want to do that all the time either.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes I just want to watch, King Kong and Godzilla fight,
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what's so great about like Spielberg films is I feel like he is sort of the archetypal, like broadly appealing movie maker.
He kind of toes the line of those two things. Like,
it's going to be entertaining. It's going to be interesting. It'll most definitely be satisfying to some degree. But it'll also be like executed well.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of it, is it's
with like meaning and purpose.
Yeah. And so I think he like ticks a lot of those boxes in a lot of his films, which is why he's like so commercially successful.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you can't argue with that, but I do think, and I think that's why he gets criticized a lot too, is because, he's not trying to do some sort of edgy, whatever, turning cinema on its head or which that's fine. People can do that too, but that's not what he's doing. And I think that's just also why he gets criticized sometimes for just maybe being too like down the middle. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. He's wanting to make entertaining movies that people can connect with. Just when it comes down to it, that's what he wants to do. And, he does it really well.
He's a storyteller, like, and he does that just really, really well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Hello there, listener. Don't you ever want more for your life? Don't you ever dream of surpassing the status of just podcast listener? Well, I've got good news. If you head on over to establishingshotpod.com and click the send a voicemail button on the right side of your screen, you can be featured on the podcast. I'd love to hear from you, whether it's a comment in response to an episode you liked, an opinion of mine you disagreed with, or just a question for me. And if you're too shy to have your voice featured, you can always email me at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. Don't settle for just being a podcast listener. Reach for the stars and get featured on The Establishing Shot. Back to the show. Yeah, it's been a really good discussion. Before we head out, do you have any like movie related film watching resources that you would like to recommend, whether it's a book or podcast or any other sort of resource?
Mm-hmm.
I always recommend Letterboxd. It's not a book or a podcast, but it is a good resource to utilize for like, a film diary.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. Yeah, I'm kind of drawing a blank as far as a movie going resource. 'Cause I don't think I've actually read too many books about movies.
Yeah.
Um,
You mentioned the podcast, the Deacons.
yeah, I would
podcast.
say, I mean, that's kind of been my kick lately, but
Yeah.
the Team Deacons podcast.
Mm-hmm.
If you're interested in sort of seeing behind the curtain of kind of how movies get made, it's a really good podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to start reading more books, like more film related books. I haven't read a ton myself. For the Christopher Nolan series, I read a book called The Nolan Variations, which was like this really good mix of going like film by film through his movies and like discussing sort of like the making of and but also like where he was in his life at that point, and also like kind of pulling Christopher Nolan and kind of like exploring the philosophical things behind the movies. That Nolan kind of obsesses over. And he wrote this book. I think the author's name is Tom Shone, or he's British, so they might pronounce it weird, but it's spelled Shone.
Okay.
And it's a really, really good, well-written book. Like it's for a book that's like a biography that walks through a director's films. It's like half like film making of book, half biography. It's like really engaging. And like it made me think about existential things. So
that's good.
I want to find more books like that are well written like that kind of dive into movies, but also like have some extra like that aren't just like information dumps, but are like well written and engaging.
Yeah, well, Tarkovsky wrote a book. I think something about time. I forget the title, but that would probably have some existential angst in it, I would imagine.
I would imagine so. I still have some Tarkovsky blind spots I need to fix. But yeah, I do. In fact, I think I've only seen 3 of his films, which he doesn't have very many. So that might be a good next endeavor for me personally, not for the podcast necessarily yet. I think I should hold off on the Tarkovsky series.
Yeah, they're intense.
Yeah.
And confusing.
But yeah, no, that maybe that's a resource that we can recommend for ourselves. Let's maybe plan on reading the Tarkovsky book. At some point.
He may have had more than one, but there's one on time, I think.
Yeah. He does like time.
Find the title of. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I guess I would recommend that if you're interested in Christopher Nolan. I when I did that series, I mentioned the book a lot. But yeah, that's a good book. I always, like I said, recommend Letterboxd. I kind of talked about Film Spotting podcast is really good. There's a lot of great film podcasts out there, though. And if you're like me, then you'll listen to several just because you're watching and thinking about movies all the time. But yeah, I don't think I have any other recommendations off the top. I was kind of winging it too.
Yeah.
I recommend-
Sculpting in Time is the name of that book.
Sculpting. I have heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess like the other recommendation I have is I've talked about these before on the podcast too, but these little film studies notebooks are helpful. They're based around like directors' filmographies, which is perfect for this podcast. But yeah, I think it's just this guy that like has a template that he like loads directors like filmographies into and then sells them on Amazon.
That's
which is
brilliant.
like a really brilliant, like, I wish I would have come up with that because I'm sure he makes a lot of money just passively. But yeah, it's helpful to have something like that if you're more of like a physical journaling person. But yeah, I think that's all. Any other thoughts?
I'm all thought out, I think.
Me too. Yeah, go watch the movies, think about them, talk about them with friends, and yeah, go the collision.org, I believe. Is that right, Sam?
That's right.
Yeah, go to collision.org. You can find all the stuff they're doing over there. Sam and Daniel, who was on for Jaws, and y'all have other people write reviews and stuff on there too. I'm pretty sure.
A few other contributors.
Yeah, and go follow. It's just called Faith and Pop Culture, right? The new podcast.
Podcast, Faith and Pop Culture.
Yep, Faith and Pop Culture. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.
Yep.
So yeah, go check that out. And that's all we have for this week. So I'll see you all again next week to talk about Spielberg's movie 1941. But until then, you've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.